time. But
Okay.
I feel like with everyone, so like my schedule hasn't changed that much, but because everyone's working from home, I feel like my schedule has changed. So I'm like, it's kind of like a snow day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally. Well, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for
Um,
having me.
oh my gosh, no, thank you. I think for what we've learned about over, I guess now it's been 2 weeks ago that we hung out. Two
Yeah,
weeks?
a
Yeah,
week,
a week.
a week.
Um, just to hear you talk about what clarity you've gotten since then, especially because we'll talk about clarity today too. But yes, I'd love to have you just introduce yourself first.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My name's Kate Dramus. I'm a conversion copywriter and coach. I help online entrepreneurs find their voice, share their voice, and really own their voice online.
Love that. Okay, so when you say like own their voice, can you maybe describe what that actually means?
Yeah. So I find that a lot of times, especially when we're starting businesses, um, we kind of like follow the mimic model, right? Like we see other people and we're like, oh man, I want to be like them. And
Mm,
really though, the reason we started our business was because there's something driving us, some place of service, some mission, some vision we have. And so I really like to help entrepreneurs get clear on what that looks like and operate from that vision so that they can really stand out as their most authentic selves. Because I believe that you are going to attract more of the right people the more you are.
yeah, totally. So when you think about, let's say, if someone gets clear on who they are, how do you see that translating into other areas aside from business?
Oh my gosh, it bleeds over into everything because you start living in alignment. So it's like as soon as you can remove like when people are like, oh, I'd really like to do this, but, and then there's something that comes after that but. As soon as you can start getting clear on like what's after the but and
Hmm.
removing those, it doesn't just change your business. I mean, it changes your life. You start showing up more authentically in your relationships. You start really owning your voice everywhere. You're more unapologetic. It's just this beautiful evolution of like just doing the things you want to do.
Right, which is what I really want to spend maybe some time talking about, especially with the current like shift that's going on right now. I'm really
Yeah.
curious if you've been in conversation, what you've seen regarding, that question of like, are you doing what you really want to do? And if you
Hmm.
aren't, what does that now look like, or how does that open up different doors?
Yeah. So it's funny because I believe that the situation obviously is very serious and there is crisis happening, but there's also beauty to me in crisis, where people have had
Mm,
more time than ever to reflect on how they're living life. And I've heard a couple of different really beautiful realizations come out of this time. One of them being, people are like, oh, I've taken a lot for granted. I was actually just talking to a friend yesterday who was like, had I known that I wasn't going to see you for weeks on end, I would
mm,
have given you a bigger hug. And so I think that it's
mm,
this time of reflection is really beautiful for people because I'm hearing a lot of people realizing not just, oh, I would have done this, but I'm also not living a life that I really want to live. There are things,
mm.
whether they're in a job they don't want to be in or their schedule isn't the way they want it to be. And it's coming up for a lot of people where suddenly they have time and space and they're like, what the heck do I do with this? And they're looking at all the projects that they have time to do or, the people that they have time to FaceTime with that they maybe haven't talked to. And they're starting to evaluate, okay, where in my life am I living really out of alignment? And how do I start doing more of that on an ongoing basis?
Hmm. Yeah, no, completely. How would you help someone identify, or what maybe does it feel like when someone is living out of alignment?
I like to relate it to like this feeling of wanting, right? Like, when you just want something
Mm.
so bad and you're like, oh, I want it. And then it's like,
Yeah.
but there's always that but that comes after it. And
Mm.
so I'm a dreamer. Like I like to daydream. I mean, there's like a reason I became a writer, right? Like I love fiction, like all of the give me a rom com. But I think that a lot of times we kind of get stuck in dreamer state in our lives where it's like, oh, I have all of these things I want to do. And there are a couple of indicators that you're putting it off, right? It's like, I'll do that when, or I'd like to do that, but like any conditional language, I think is really,
Mm.
is something to pay attention to as you're going through your thoughts and really looking at like, okay, am I living the way I want to live? That kind of feeling of like stuckness where you're like, oh, I just feel like I'm not at my best. those are all indicators to me that you're just not quite in that shift of doing the things you want to do, showing up the way you want to show up. And typically there's something underlying there that's preventing you, because if you just did it, right, like you wouldn't have those feelings. So let's say that, I don't know, you wanted to like start an online business. If there wasn't something preventing you from doing that, you would have done it already. So I think it's really about getting clear on what's the thing that's preventing me from actually doing it.
Okay, so let's maybe talk more about that piece, because I think current climate, there's a lot of people that are looking at how, especially in my industry, like how do I take my business online, and that clarity piece. So like you had mentioned, what did you say? If you were clear on what you wanted, you would have done it?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Like if there was nothing preventing you, you would have done it already.
Okay. So what do you feel like is the common like preventative things that people need?
I honestly think it's fear. And I think it's fear of failure and fear of judgment. And I think it's often cloaked in like a knowledge gap. People are like, oh, I don't know how. Like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. And I'm like, well, there's, if you look at our online space right now, it's so cool because there's so much information and it can feel overwhelming. Like, there's a lot of information on how to build an online business. But really, like, business is very simple. James Wedmore always says business is simple, right? Build an audience and sell them what they want. And I love that because it's like, yeah, that is exactly how it happens online. Build an audience somewhere, then sell them what they want.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times the things that I hear come up for entrepreneurs, especially those who are new to the online space, is it's fear cloaked in a knowledge gap. It's like, oh, I'm not really sure how I would do that, or I need all of these things in place before I start helping people. And really, I think it comes down to uncertainty of, well, what if I put something out there and I don't have a perfect website, or what if I put out an offer and no one buys it, or what if I take that next step and find out it's not what I want to do. So I think that it really comes down to that fear of failure and fear of judgment.
Ooh, and that's so good because I think I definitely relate to that in the sense of like, I wanted to have everything like ready to go before I was like, here world, like interpret this.
Right.
So, I think you said fear cloaked in a knowledge gap. That's so well put and so concise. I think it's super relatable too. We were on like a coaching call with some of the other trainers at my studio, and there was a lot of like, well, I don't know how to make that transition into the online space. And I think it was the hows. It was a lot of like, I don't know even how to set up my camera. I don't even know how to like, set up Zoom or whatever it may be. So I think that is like such a good perspective on what's actually underneath that too.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, like all of that is figure outable. Right? Like it really is. Like what is that book? Everything is figure outable. And it truly is. I mean, like, and I get it because I've been there as well, where it's like, okay, but I want to do this, but I'm not really sure how. But if you were to remove the how and just pretend that you did know, oftentimes we can uncover that there's probably something else happening, because you could Google, right, like how to set up Zoom. You could Google best camera. And there's so much how-to content out there that can help you. And so I always challenge people. I'm like, okay, well, what if you did know how? What then? Would you be doing it? And if not, what's preventing you from doing it?
Ooh, and that's such a good question. That is such a good question. Okay, awesome. I really want to go back to like you had mentioned just this piece on clarity and getting clear and clear and clear. And I think it's such a very valuable question and point of conversation to have. I'm just wondering, with someone who like maybe there's like more of the buts, like the butt conversation. For someone who's like, I really enjoy this, but whatever kind of surfaces off of that, is there any type of like guiding questions or something that someone could entertain when they're working towards getting clarity from a professional standpoint, from an authenticity, like if I'm living my life in alignment perspective that you have?
Yeah. So I like to start with what you don't want. Sometimes I think it's really hard for us to figure out what we want. Yeah. So it's like, well, I don't really know what I want. Well, cool. So like, what do you not want? And that was actually, so before I like took my business full time, I worked at an ad agency, then I worked in corporate. And when I was graduating college and like going to find a job, I had no idea what job I wanted. but I knew what I didn't want. And that was so helpful. And I just made a list. I was like, this is the type of job I don't want. And then I was so clear. I was like, okay, well, what's the opposite of that? What does that look like?
Oh my gosh,
from a
nice.
culture standpoint, from, you know, a flexibility standpoint, from a workplace, from the everyday. And I think it's really helpful because it's like, well, if I could have anything, like, I don't know, there's so many options. Great. Start with what you don't want.
Oh, so good. And then how detailed would you encourage someone to be if it is going into like, I don't want to be working, like, let's say, like, would you encourage them to be super specific?
Yeah, I would get super specific.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Because then you can really start to finesse what you do want, right? Like, is it that you don't want to be working Mondays, or is it that you want to be done by noon on Monday? Like, what does that look like, right? And you can really start to get clear on, and then you can start to ask yourself, oh my gosh, now we're going to go down a whole rabbit hole. But then you can start to ask yourself, like, why, right? So what is it about this that I don't like? Like, what is it about this structure that I don't like? What is it about this structure that I do like? And that's going to give you an indication of those underlying things that really make you happy and make you excited.
You know what's really nice that you actually just naturally did is I think sometimes the why questions are really hard for people to answer in occasion, and you actually use the word what is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just almost way more inviting for someone to be like, oh, what is it that I don't like about, you know, versus like, why is it that I don't like to, you know, work a 9 to 5? It's like, what is it about that? You know, it almost seems just way more inviting for someone to kind of go through that whole exploration of like, oh, why don't, you know, actually addressing the why, like kind of swapping it for like what is. I actually really like that too.
Yeah, I think sometimes why makes us feel like we have to justify, where like what is just more exploratory. Like we can actually define a what.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
So for yourself, have you, with what we last left on regarding where you were with your current business, what is your new clarity pieces that you've gained since then?
Oh my gosh, it's been huge. So I go through this process all the time, obviously, with like what I'm doing. And as you know, at our mastermind, I got massive clarity. So we're working on really rolling out new ways to help people own their voice in a much deeper way. So we have a couple copywriting programs, a couple one-on-one copywriting offers. And what was really apparent to me was I love copy. I'm so good at it. Like I'm really good at it. And copy is a vehicle for people to get their voice out there. And there's so much more that we can be doing to help entrepreneurs really live in alignment, really own their voice, own their messaging. And for me, I think it starts with your messaging and your copy, because that's how you display who you are, right? It's like how you communicate online. It's everywhere. But
totally. They were saying when people visit your website, it's like that's like their first impression, what they read, what words you use, even photos and things like that. But it's a lot of like the language that you use is like your first like introduction to someone that you've never met, right? We don't have the opportunity of like meeting them. It's like they just meet us through like our website.
Yeah, exactly. And like when they're on your Instagram, like your captions, like that's how we communicate. And video, but like again, like this is all like how you message yourself, right? Like what do you talk about? What are the things you do? And so I think it's really for me, it's work that we've been doing. Like when we coach in our coaching program, very often the conversations I have with my students are not around, yes, they're around copy, but they tend to go deeper, right? It's like, well, what's holding you back from putting this post out there? And why do you feel like, you know, this launch isn't performing? And it's a lot of the deeper work. And so we are really leaning into, especially now, because I've been seeing so many people get their message out, which I just think it's so beautiful. Like people have just risen to a whole new level of service during this time. And so for me, it's about how can I help people reach more people and serve more people in a way that's really authentic to them? How can I help people in this time where people are, it's kind of like a rebirth for a lot of people of like, how am I living my life?
I feel that for sure.
Right? Like that energy is there. I mean, there's like the panic energy and then there's like the leveling up of the creative consciousness energy. So I'm choosing to focus on this one. But I do, and I think that, you know, the more that I can help people like get clear on what they want and get clear on how they want to show up, the more that I can help them in their messaging and their copy, because that's what it stems from. Like it stems from you. You are your brand. So that's what we're going to be working on over the next couple of weeks, which I'm so excited about.
So cool. You use the word deeper to get a deeper kind of understanding of themselves. How would you maybe explain what you mean by that? Because I know that we tapped on like authenticity and like getting clear and like kind of like unraveling those pieces, but I'm curious what you mean by like deeper.
Yeah, so to me, it's about really getting in tune with why you do what you do. There's just like the calling to be an entrepreneur to me is very unique because like I don't think many people just wake up one day and are like, I'm going to leave my completely stable job and just like go, right? Like it's not like,
Yeah.
and it's weird because it took me a while to realize that that is not what most people want. Most of my friends here in Atlanta, they're not actually all of my friends here in Atlanta are not entrepreneurs. And they like, we don't like, I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to leave your job? And they're like, what do you mean you want to leave your job? Like we don't see eye to eye. Like, and it took me a while to realize that. And so to me, there's usually something deeper that's driving people. There's some sort of mission, some vision, some why that's driving them to do what they do and deal with the ebbs and flows of entrepreneurship and deal with the crazy. And so I like to help people get clear on what that is because that is the catalyst that started you on this journey. And it's easy sometimes to lose that, right? To lose sight of that when you're like focused on a launch or you're just trying to move your classes online and then you're trying to figure out Zoom and like you're into the technical stuff and you're like, okay, how do I scale? And you're crunching numbers. It's easy to forget that like you woke up one day and were so fueled with fire and passion to go out there and create this dream when you're in the nitty gritty. So I like to bring people back to that place of center and focus.
Oh, so good. So let's say like I was thinking about probably the more common answer when someone is in a service-based entrepreneur industry, like, oh, I want to help people.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
so like for you, probably a lot of your creative work comes from like peeling away those layers, asking really great questions to get them to like probably more of the rooted reason as to, oh, where does this, like you mentioned, kind of stem from?
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you find, I mean, obviously I'm biased because I do believe in that work in my own practice, but it's like kind of getting to that root reason.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there's the clarity, then there's the alignment, but there's probably so much more connectedness to your work as well.
Yes, absolutely. And it's like you have a direction to go, right? It's like the fuel that really brings everything going. And when you lose sight of that, it's like, okay, well, what's the point? Like, why am I doing this? And I think, yes, everyone that I work with is there to help people, but that's a very surface level answer. Like why were you called to help these people specifically in this way? Because there's a reason there.
Mm-hmm. So what is your deeper reasoning to why you do what you do?
Oh my gosh. So I became, I love this story. I've been a copywriter forever. I've always loved to write, but I really leaned into copy coaching and messaging and got clear on the mission of helping people find their voice when, in the summer of 2018, my life like imploded and I got out of an abusive relationship and I was at home. I will never forget this. I was at home and I just taken my business full time, like maybe 6 months prior. And I was laying in bed and I was like, I had so much to do and I just like couldn't bring myself to do any of it because I was like, real life is happening right now. And I don't want to show up on Zoom for these calls. Like, what does this matter? And I was looking at my schedule and there's a woman that I had a call with, a student of mine. I was doing like one-on-one marketing coaching. I was the entrepreneur who was like, I can help you with everything. And we had a call scheduled and when she bought my program, she had reached out to me and we had a very open and vulnerable conversation about business and dreams and the success she wanted. And she had told me in that conversation that she felt like no one cared about what she had to say and that she didn't deserve the success she wanted. And that day when I was like, my life is falling apart, like I don't know what to do. How am I going to keep up with a house and 3 dogs? I got out of bed for her because I was like, I can't let someone feel like their voice and their mission doesn't matter. And it's really no surprise to me that like a year after I had my voice taken away, that I help people find like that alignment was just so strong for me. So yeah, that's when I got really clear on this is how I wanted to show up for people.
Wow, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is awesome. Wow.
Yeah. It was big.
Yeah. And very clear.
Very clear. A clear mission.
Yeah. Um, okay. Wow, that's really powerful though, because I've heard that same thing in the work that I do. Well, like I don't have a story, like no one cares what I have to say, like no one's listening, like those types of things. And it's
Hmm.
like we all do have something that has shaped us, probably more than one thing, but a lot of things that have shaped us, a lot of things that have created who we are and how we feel and how we feel relate to the world and how we can, you know, be of service, whether or not it's like directly in your business, but in general. And I think that's like it's so sweet. It just makes me feel like really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sometimes we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I have an exercise that I'll take students through to get clear on their purpose. And I always share mine. Like I share the story of how I, came to really uncover my purpose and how that has changed the trajectory of my business and how I show up in my business. And I always like to tell people after the fact. I should probably preface it with this too. Like you don't have to have some massive moment, right? Like it doesn't have to be something that was like huge and life changing. I mean, you could have woken up one day and been like, man, I really want to spend more time with my kids. Like that could have been the catalyst for you. So it doesn't, I think sometimes we put some like this pressure on ourselves where it's like, it has to be this like big story. And
Yeah.
it's like, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It just has to be like, what is authentic and true to you inside your heart that got you started on this path?
Yeah, for sure. And then there's the comparison piece too, right? Like, well, my story doesn't look like hers. Like her story is
Yes.
like so much more like dramatized and like all these things. And it's like, okay, well, I can't step into that because it looks nothing like hers or his or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
That's a really good
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay, we touched on the butts. So I definitely
Yes.
want to address that. So you said overcoming butts, and you used a great
Hmm.
example, like I could have started this, but would you mind elaborating more on how that is a potential barrier and how you can break through that for a lot of people that may be going through that?
Yeah, I think first is like giving a voice to the butt is really important. Um, actually, I went live about this morning. This like whole
Nice.
idea. I think sometimes we get into like I have to be positive, and I don't want to I don't want to manifest the negative, and so I'm just not even going to talk about it. And when we do that, we tend to suppress those limiting beliefs and fears and doubts, which doesn't make them go away. Like they're still there, you're just not actually speaking them out. And when we can actually put a voice and speak out and bring it out of us and into existence, it really loses its power over us because then it's just a statement, right? And then you can get to, okay, so what if, is that true? What if it's not true? Like what would it look like if this didn't exist? And I think that really it comes down to just evaluating and reflecting and asking yourself those questions. So let's say the but is like, I want to start an online dance studio, but I'm too old. I don't know, I'm just coming up with something random.
Yeah.
Like, is that true? Like, is there anyone older than me who has a dance studio? How old is too old? How do I know that? And you can really just start to examine that statement and where it's coming from and really start to poke holes at it.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because I think when we start to do that kind of leaning into the curiosity of like, where is this actually coming from? It's really fascinating when you go back. You're like, whoa, it was like this thing that had happened, or it's this belief that I have.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my lives, we've been talking a lot about like limiting beliefs. I would love to hear your perspective on kind of that in general, that whole encompassing conversation of, the narrative that we have, internal beliefs, limiting beliefs, all of those pieces.
Yeah, I was going to say I love limiting beliefs. I love limiting belief work. And I think I think what's important is to realize that they're common and that the goal isn't to not have any, right? I think sometimes like people are like, oh, look, but I dealt with that belief. And it's like, well, yeah, but it probably comes up in new ways in your life. And to remember that it's progress and progression and really getting clear on, learnings and applying. And it's like, okay, you have the thought and then you deal with it versus you having the thought and you not dealing with it. So it's all an evolution. And just understanding that I think that I found that a lot of them come back to some core beliefs, like I'm not enough, I'm not worthy,
Right.
and
Right.
being able to look and pull on tools that you've brought into your life thus far, right? So if you've dealt with a limiting belief and you see it coming up in a different way, like what did you do the first time you dealt with it? How can you apply those learnings to the belief again? I think is really important.
Yeah, super valuable. And I think just like you mentioned, kind of like understanding that once you address it and potentially I wouldn't say move on from it, but just maybe creating a better strategy to how to cope and manage it. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
still going to come up in, like you said, in maybe a different way. And for me,
Mm-hmm.
stepping into entrepreneurship, I was like, whoa, I thought I dealt with these,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I was like, oh,
Exactly.
never mind. So like
Yes.
there, like you mentioned, there's like this evolution, there's this recycling of, these things that were definitely addressed, but different seasons and different challenges that we face, like you mentioned, there's kind of these core beliefs that we'll all come back to. And mine is very relatable of like, I'm not enough, I'm not doing enough. So I totally relate
Mm-hmm.
to those pieces for sure.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think also like having support, right? So having people that maybe
mm,
know your patterns. So like you and I obviously both know Liz, and like she is someone that I can go to where she knows, like she can like see them and she can map my beliefs and she just knows. And so when it shows up as something different, and I'm like, this is totally new. She's like, no, it's not. Look, it connects to this. And I think that's really helpful because we're so into our
yeah.
own stuff. Like we can be so
Hmm.
into it to have a trusted resource who can be like, hey, it looks like you're, going back into this
Yeah,
belief. It just took on a new
totally.
face.
Right, right. No, that's totally true. I was thinking of something you were saying. Um, oh, and I think actually probably going back to, what makes you probably so great at what you do, which was funny at the mastermind, you said something about you help people get clear in their messaging, but then there was like an irony of how you were trying to get clarity on your own, like specific, sorry, we froze a little bit, on your own
Yeah,
specific
just a little bit.
direction. And you're like, that's ironic.
Yeah,
But when we're,
right. Yeah,
but when we're
I
so
know.
in it, right? In our
Mm-hmm.
own growth, in our own development, in our own businesses, things like that, it's really hard for us to see, yeah, this is, why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I choose to do what I do. And so it's like
Mm-hmm.
having that support, having that conversation is like, for me, I'm super conversational. So I get a ton of clarity from just talking to people.
Yeah.
And like that, like you mentioned, just having that one or two people that can help guide you through that is like so reassuring, especially right now.
Yeah, I agree. Like connection is so important now more than ever. And it is true, really. You're so close to it, and I mean, it's even from like the copywriting realm. I was talking to my sister this morning, and I'm writing up a sales page for an offer we have
Hmm.
coming out, and I was like, I'm too close to it. Like I can't write it, and like this is what I teach on. And so I think it is
Yeah.
really important that we give ourselves that grace and that space, and we realize that we don't have to do it alone, and we shouldn't do it alone.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Um, okay, last piece that I definitely want to give you some time to talk about is you mentioned creating your reality.
Yes. So,
Mm.
how deep do we want to go? So, this is a concept that was relatively newer to me as of like circa 2018 when I was going through this massive shift. And someone was like, "Your thoughts create your reality, and you have control over what you create." I'm like, no, I don't think you understand. Like, I feel the way I feel. Like, I felt like I didn't have control, right? And I was like, well, if I just could, well, yeah, if it was just as easy as choosing to think something different, I would. And it took me a long time to realize that it truly is as simple as choosing the thoughts in your mind of the reality you want to create. And I think the missing piece is that we don't realize that that's a muscle that needs to be built and a habit,
Mm.
especially if you're not used to really working with your brain. I'm a thinker, I'm an over processor, an over analyzer. And so for me, it was very much my brain was running the show. Like it was like I felt like I was just kind of a sideline component of the thoughts in my head. And I was like, yeah, but I don't have control. Like they just go, right? Like meditation, whew, that took me a while to really get on board with because I was like, I just can't stop my head. But it's interesting now that I've been able to like learn this and I've done a lot of work around it, and I help a lot of my clients now like really work on their thoughts. Our thoughts do create our reality. They absolutely do, and it's as simple as what you put out is what you attract, and it's just it feels like magic, but it makes so much sense, right? Like if I'm looking at a glass and I'm seeing it, I mean, it's like I'm like, oh, look, it's half full. Like that's a whole different, it's a perspective and it's true. And saying it's half empty is also true, but you're going to look at things differently and create things differently based on what's going on in your head.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like, the whole, I'm a big believer in like gratitude journaling and practicing
Mm-hmm.
gratitude and appreciation. And it's like there's so much research, right? Like the happiest, most fulfilled people are the ones that are constantly kind of in this practice, right? The strengthening this
Mm-hmm.
muscle of like really reflecting on like, what can I be grateful for and what am I grateful for right now? With the silver lining also being, which you touched on earlier too, is that if you're having a bad day and you're not really seeing like all the gratitude and appreciation, like that's okay too. Like don't also fake it and force it, right? But it is
Yes,
something that can
yes,
always be addressed in practice. So I really appreciate that piece too.
yeah.
Go ahead. Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I was thinking that, it's even as simple as like, there are days where I'm like, well, I'm grateful for the roof over my head. And it feels so cliche, but like when you're frustrated, there's always something to be grateful for. And I think that's, it's beautiful because you can have that balance, right? You can be like, well, today I'm not as grateful. Like, I don't feel like, oh, the birds are singing and everything's beautiful, but like I have a home. So I
Yeah,
think it's really, I think it's really
yeah,
magical to be able to find that balance.
yeah. And with practice, right? Because I think whenever you're starting something new, like expect yourself to not number one, well, perfect doesn't exist, but to like allow yourself the freedom to like explore, be curious, but not necessarily associate or tie yourself to a specific style of like maybe
Yes,
strengthening this muscle, practicing
yes,
gratitude. It's
yeah.
like using the word authenticity, like what is authentic to you right now. And if it is
Mhm.
like, yeah, I am grateful for the roof over my head, like that's a good enough answer, you know?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I tell you what, when I first started it, so I started with gratitude journaling. That's how I was like, okay, well they say, your thoughts create your
yeah,
reality. So I'm gonna start
let me
like, I'll
test
be
this
grateful.
out.
Let me test this out. Let me try it. And I felt fake. Like I was and then it
Same.
wasn't that I wasn't grateful, but I was like, this is stupid. Like I was like, what? Like, I know, like, oh, I already pray about this. So I was like, it felt fake to me because I didn't feel like an immediate. I think to me, I was like, well, I'm supposed to immediately feel better, and like all of a sudden, like all my problems are supposed to disappear, and it took pushing through that to realize like that's not what that's about at all.
Mm,
And then I started really looking forward to it because I was like, oh, this is actually a very peaceful time for me. And then I was able to see that ritual was about peace. And when I was at peace, then I could think more clearly. And so I just think I encourage you guys, if you haven't done it before, to just like embrace the fact that it might feel a little weird.
yeah. No, I totally, when I started doing it, I like was like working with a coach at the time and I was like, hey, like, I don't know if my answer is good enough. Like, like, is it enough to be like, I'm happy that the sun's out? And he's like, there's no perfect answer. Like, just like literally what's the thing that comes to mind? And I was like, and for me, it was like, again, like, what beliefs do I have about like what's good enough or what I can be
Yeah.
grateful for? And it was like,
Yeah.
literally, you can be grateful for whatever you want.
Right? Right.
Yeah.
I know. I know. And
Yeah.
then I'm like, oh, like I forgot something. Like, am I not grateful for it? Like, yeah. Like, yeah. It was a process.
Yeah. So if you embark on gratitude journaling, allow yourself like literally a blank piece of paper, no rules, like literally just write it out.
Yes.
Um, okay, awesome. Kate, is there anything else like you feel you want to touch on that we didn't get to address yet, with some of the things that we talked about beforehand?
No, this has just been so amazing. I would just
Yeah.
encourage you guys who are listening, it's a really wonky time right now. And I definitely don't have all the answers. And what I know for sure though is that even in this time that we are able to create happiness and create peace. And I think it's important to look at this time through the lens of opportunity for you personally and to really think about, okay, am I living the way I want to live? Am I working the way I want to work? Am I showing up the way I want to show up? And if not, what are the things that I would like to change? It's not about, like, I'm not saying like, use this time to be productive. Like maybe you just need to take a week and like just chill.
Yeah,
But like
just process.
yeah, just process and breathe. I just encourage you to reflect. I think it's really important that I think you can look at this in several ways. And the way that I've chosen to look at this time is that I've never been given this type of time before to have that space. Like I've never in my life been like, oh, I have time and space like this. And we can look at it and say like, it's awful and I'm bored and I'm stir crazy. And like yesterday I was very stir crazy. I was like, oh my God. Or we can look at it and say like, wow, like what am I going to do with the time I've been given? So
Yeah. So good. And such like very calming kind of words as well. Like, there's no right or wrong way, obviously, like you mentioned, like take this week if you need to process whatever feels authentic to you. But it's like, if you can surround yourself with people that speak light into something like this, speak opportunity into something like this, I think it helps kind of move a lot of us potentially out of this this place of like maybe not seeing like potential, not seeing,
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, there's just now time,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah.
yeah. Thank you so much, Kate. I will definitely send you this recording and everything, but this was like so valuable for so many recent conversations I've had, and I can't wait to share this. So I appreciate your time, your insights, your
Awesome.
clarity. I was like literally like I'm like taking notes because it was so good. I was like, oh my God, I want to write that down. So yeah, thank you
Amazing.
so much. I think this is going to be just so helpful for a lot of people that maybe are feeling a little unclear or uncertain right now. So I appreciate your time so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're so welcome. I hope you have a great day and we will be in touch.
Okay.
Okay,
Bye.
bye everyone.